basically I've shown you gouges, I've shown you knives, but you can also puncture the surface. So anything that is sharp, maybe metallic, that can puncture into the surface will affect the surface of your block. So you can use a hammer and nails. You might want to warn people in your house before you do this one. And so you can kind of create a stippled effect with this. And I know some people who've made entire lino blocks or woodcuts with just this method. It tends to look more like in the style of wood engravings with very small, minute lines. So you can kind of create a pattern with that, or details like stars. I like to look at early metal cuts, where a lot of the metal cuts were created by like indenting it or indenting metal with tools like a nail or pointy tools. But sometimes you can't, unlike the carving, sometimes this like pinches the linoleum in, so you can barely see what kind of marks you're making. So sometimes you really don't entirely know what you're going to get until you can take a proof. So you can also use things like thumbtacks and other kind of needles, though I would be very careful with things like sewing needles. This is some kind of knitting tool, but I use this for etching and drawing into a ground on a copper plate. So I've used thumbtacks and nails. Safety pins usually leave something so small that sometimes it doesn't pick up and fills in. So to a certain extent you can use tools like that to create stipple marks, but after, like, usually you don't want anything too much smaller than like a thumbtack, and sometimes these might end up filling in if you use too much ink and don't build up your ink slowly. Okay, one more tool that I have that if you ever want to get fancy, this usually doesn't always work on linoleum, but sometimes it does, and it's called a multi-line tool. And so this one has two sides to it. I can use this in etching, like scratching into ground, or dry point, which is another intaglio process like etching. But I've also used this in wood blocks, especially wood engravings that have a tighter surface, but sometimes you can get it to work on a lino block. So this isn't something that you guys are likely to have, but if you like cross hatching, this is the tool for you. So just to show you what it looks like, usually you kind of draw it towards yourself. So I think some people call this a rake tool. So this has two sides. One's finer, one's another. You can get them individually, but sometimes EC Lions makes this. So it's kind of fun to play around with to build up different, but very much like the stipple marks, sometimes these have a tendency to fill in very quickly on a lino cut versus like something you're going to etch into, or a wood engraving. But just to show that there's tools out there that can make this kind of work a lot easier if you're interested. Maybe I'll take a proof and see what that looks like.